I was 40 when I realised family can abandon you without ever leaving the room. My rally, red 69. Stingray wasn't just a car, it was the last heartbeat of my grandfather's garage, the smell of oil-stained Saturdays, the promise I made to myself when no one else believed in me. I trusted my parents with it for 3 weeks while I worked overseas. When I came back, the garage door yawned open to nothing but silence, 2 ordinary SUVs and my mother's smug smile. "Thanks to your car," she said, "your sister is finally living." They hadn't just sold my car, they had sold me. The key is small, dull silver, its teeth worn smooth from decades of turning in the same lock. To anyone else it looks like junk, a forgotten scrap that belongs in the bottom of a hardware drawer. But to me it is sacred. My grandfather pressed it into my palm when I was 7 years old, the first time he let me open the garage door by myself. He winked, called it my magic key, and told me never to lose it. At 40, I still keep it on a separate ring, away from my apartment keys, away from my office badge. It feels warm when I hold it, as if his hand is still there, steady and sure. When I close my eyes, I can still smell his garage, the tang of gasoline, the sweetness of grease-stained rags, the earthy scent of old wood and metal shavings. While other kids woke up on Saturdays to cartoons and cereal, I woke up to the rumble of his old pickup idling in my driveway. He would honk twice, and I'd run out with my ponytail bouncing, grease already staining my jeans. The garage wasn't just a place to fix cars, it was a world where I mattered. My grandfather never once told me I was strange for wanting to crawl under a chassis instead of twirl in a tutu. Instead, he said cars had souls, that every hum and rattle was a voice, and if I listened closely enough I could hear their stories. I believed him. I still do. But outside that garage, in my parents' house, it was different. My younger sister Mia was the darling. 4 years my junior, she was delicate, graceful, everything my parents thought a daughter should be. She danced in recital halls under spotlights while I wiped oil from my forehead in the corner, clapping quietly. She got the lace dresses, the ballet shoes, the private lessons. I got lectures about being practical, and the rolled eyes of a mother who sighed every time I tracked grease through the kitchen. I remember one dinner when I tried to explain how spark plugs worked. My father cleared his throat, redirected the conversation to Mia's upcoming recital, and my mother said, "Not at the table, Lauren." The words felt like a door slamming shut. It wasn't that I hated my sister. She was sweet in her own way, but the imbalance carved hollows in me. The message was clear. Mia's world deserved applause. Mine deserved silence. I learned to keep my victories quiet, to celebrate alone. That's why, years later, when I finally bought the Corvette, I cried. 5 years of 70-hour work weeks, of skipping vacations, of sharing cramped apartments with too many roommates, of eating sandwiches at my desk while my colleagues ordered sushi and champagne. Every dollar I saved went into one purpose, the rally red Stingray that matched the one my grandfather once polished with reverent hands. When I drove it home from Wisconsin, my chest ached the way it does when you finally keep a promise to yourself. I whispered, "We did it, Grandpa," tears streaming down my face. For once, I wasn't invisible, not because anyone in my family suddenly applauded me, but because the Corvette itself seemed to acknowledge me. Its engine roared like a voice only I could hear, like a spirit recognizing its keeper. In that moment, the years of being dismissed, overlooked, quietly set aside. They didn't vanish, but they shifted. I had built something undeniable. The girl with grease under her nails had grown into a woman who could carry her own dreams into reality, no matter who clapped or who rolled their eyes. And still, even as the wind whipped my hair and the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, I carried the old key in my pocket, because beneath the shine of the Corvette was the deeper truth. I wasn't just proving myself to the world. I was reminding myself that I had never been wrong to love what I loved, that my grandfather's faith in me mattered more than my parents' dismissals. That little silver key was proof. Proof that I belonged, not in their vision of a perfect daughter, but in my own story, one I had written with sweat, sacrifice, and an engine's hum. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Tokyo, 3 weeks. A client too important to refuse. I stared at the itinerary on my screen, excitement tangled with dread. Career-wise, it was everything I had worked toward, the kind of assignment that meant promotion and influence. But all I could think about was the Stingray. Chicago had been crawling with car thefts lately, and the thought of leaving my rally red Corvette unattended in a city garage for that long made my chest tighten. I knew I needed a safer place. That night, over dinner, I laid out the problem to Ethan. He wasn't just my partner, but a man who understood engines the way poets understand words. His replica 69 Stingray sat in his garage, a near-perfect twin to mine. "We could swap them," he suggested between bites of pasta. "Yours stays with me in climate control. Mine goes to your parents. They'll never know the difference." I studied him across the table, his easy confidence, and realised it was the most logical plan. My parents could recognise a ballet shoe from 50 feet away, but the nuances of classic car authenticity, never. So on Thursday evening, I drove the 40 minutes to Glenview with Ethan's replica under my hands, the engine note almost right, but not quite. Dad was mowing the lawn when I pulled into the driveway. He straightened, sweat darkening his collar, and let out a low whistle. "Still a beauty," he said, patting the hood. I forced a smile, praying he wouldn't notice the subtle differences, the slightly newer trim, the less weathered chrome. Mum came to the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Lauren, what a surprise, staying for dinner." I explained about the Tokyo trip, about needing to keep the car safe. "Of course," Dad said immediately. "We've got plenty of space since Mia moved her things to her new apartment." His tone carried pride, the kind he rarely used for me. We guided the car into their garage, and I gave careful instructions. Start it once a week, let it run for 15 minutes, don't drive it. Insurance complications, the custom cover. Dad nodded, but I could see the faint roll of his eyes, as though my care was excessive. When I handed Mum the key, the old silver one I still carried for ritual's sake, she looked at it as if it were clutter. Without thinking, she dropped it into a basket of odds and ends by the door. Half-used candles, loose screws, a broken tape measure. My breath caught. To her, the symbol of everything I treasured was no more significant than junk drawer debris. At dinner, Mia joined us, glowing with stories about her stressful new job and the friends planning a Mediterranean cruise. "I just can't afford it," she sighed, as though the world owed her a ticket. Mum's sympathetic cooing filled the space, Dad's silence more complicit than neutral. I bit into my food, tasting bitterness more than flavour. Afterward, while clearing plates, I paused by the mantel. The family photos were arranged neatly, but my eyes snagged on one frame. My grandfather and me, side by side in his garage, grease on our faces, pride in his eyes. Except the frame had been pushed partly behind Mia's graduation portrait, her smile shining in the foreground, my memory half hidden in the back. My hand hovered, tempted to pull it forward again, but I let it stay where it was. That placement said everything. As I prepared to leave, Dad clapped my shoulder. "You know," he said casually, "if you ever did decide to sell that car, you'd fetch a good price, classic like that, plenty of collectors would line up." He smiled as if offering advice, unaware of the chill that slid through me. The thought of parting with the Corvette felt like tearing out a piece of my rib cage. I laughed weakly, but inside, unease coiled. He meant nothing by it, I told myself. Or maybe he did. Driving back to the city, the replica hummed beneath me, but my mind replayed the image of the silver key in that cluttered basket. My grandfather's photo hidden behind Mia's and my father's offhand comment about selling. The signs were there, small tremors under the surface, warnings I ignored, because who would imagine that family, the people entrusted with your most sacred things, could look at them and see only leverage, only opportunity. The taxi rolled to a stop in front of my parents' house on a bright Tuesday afternoon. My body hummed with exhaustion from the 13-hour flight, but underneath the fatigue was excitement. I had landed the deal in Tokyo, the kind of contract that would change my career. All I wanted now was to see my Stingray waiting in the garage, to hear the engine purr like a welcome home anthem. I tugged my suitcase up the driveway and froze. The garage door gaped open, but the bay where the Corvette should have been was empty. Dad's sedan sat to the left, Mum's SUV to the right, but the middle was bare concrete, stained with the faint outline of tyre marks leading out. No, I whispered, my pulse climbing. Maybe Dad had moved it. Maybe Ethan had picked it up early. I shoved the suitcase aside and hurried inside. Mum was in the kitchen arranging cookies on a plate as though this were any other homecoming. She smiled tight and too practised. "Welcome back, sweetheart. How was your flight?" I didn't answer her question. "Where's my car?" The smile shifted, sharpened. "Relax, Lauren. Thanks to your car, your sister finally got the chance of a lifetime. She's on a cruise right now, living the way she deserves." Her words struck like a slap. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean, thanks to my car?" Dad appeared in the doorway, his newspaper folded under his arm. He avoided my eyes, clearing his throat. We sold it. For Mia. 50,000. It was a fair deal." The room tilted. My stomach hollowed out, as if the floor had dropped beneath me. "You what?" My voice cracked against the walls. Dad spread his hands, palms outward, the way he always did when he thought reason could smooth anything over. "Try to understand. Mia's been working so hard and all her friends were going. It would have crushed her to be left behind. We didn't want her to feel—" "You sold my car." The words came out louder this time, jagged with disbelief. "It's just a car," Mum said flatly, setting the plate down with a clink. "Family is what matters. Your sister needed this." I stared at her, at the calm conviction in her face, and felt my chest tear open. They hadn't just traded metal and paint. They had traded me. Every hour I'd sweated through, every dream I'd clung to, every memory of my grandfather bound up in that car, all of it reduced to a ticket for Mia's vacation. "Do you know what that car was worth?" I whispered. Dad flinched. "The buyer said 50 was fair." "Fair?" My laugh was sharp, empty. "That car was worth 85,000 at minimum. You didn't even check. You just gave it away." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Mum as though she might rescue him. She only lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with the same righteousness she had always reserved for defending Mia. My hands shook. My heartbeat thundered in my temples. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to rewind time to when I had still believed that they could be trusted. Instead, I stood rooted in place, trembling under the weight of betrayal. It wasn't about the money. It was about what the Corvette represented. My grandfather's faith, my own grit, proof that I was not invisible, and they had traded it like loose change, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. The air thickened with silence, broken only by the ticking clock above the stove. My parents watched me, waiting perhaps for me to yield, to understand, to accept my role as the strong one who always absorbed the blow. But I couldn't, not this time. I turned towards the open garage, the empty space where my car should have been, and I knew with a clarity that seared. It wasn't just the Corvette they had sold, it was me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of the stunned silence. I fumbled it out and saw Ethan's name on the screen. His message was short, almost casual. "Just pulled up. Where's the Stingray?" A sound escaped my throat. Half laugh, half sob. Cold, brittle, wrong. My parents looked at me, startled, but I couldn't stop. The absurdity of it all twisted into something sharp. They thought they'd sold my soul, but the cruel humour was that they hadn't even known what they were selling. Before I could answer Ethan, the phone rang again, this time an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "This is Lauren Pierce." "Miss Pierce," a man's voice said briskly, "my name is Peter Donovan. I recently purchased a 1969 Corvette Stingray from your parents. There seems to be an issue with the title transfer. The signature isn't matching the registration." My pulse spiked. "I see. I'd like to resolve this," he continued, suspicion in his tone. "Could you confirm you authorised them to sell the vehicle?" Every instinct screamed at me to tell him the truth, to drop the weight squarely where it belonged. Instead, I forced calm into my voice. "There must be a misunderstanding. Let me speak with my parents and call you back within the hour." He hesitated, then agreed. When I hung up, my mother's eyes darted, sharp with nerves. My father's face had gone pale. I wandered into the hallway, desperate to breathe, and that's when I saw it, the basket by the door. Half-burned candles, screws, a crumpled receipt, and there, among the clutter, lay my grandfather's silver garage key, the same key he had once pressed into my hand like a blessing. My mother had tossed it here without thought, without reverence. To her, it was nothing. I picked it up slowly, my fingers closing around the metal. Its weight was familiar, steady, but in that moment it felt heavier than ever, an anchor dragging me down into the truth I had resisted all my life. To them I was clutter too, useful when needed, disregarded when not. I turned back into the living room, holding the key tight enough to cut my palm. "Why did you forge my signature?" I asked. Dad flinched. "Lauren, don't lie to me. Mr. Donovan just called. He noticed the mismatch. You signed my name on documents you had no right to touch." Mum's chin lifted, the familiar armour sliding into place. "We had no choice. The buyer needed proof. We couldn't wait for you. It was only paperwork." "Only paperwork?" My laugh was bitter. "That's fraud. That's criminal." Her mouth tightened. "Stop being so dramatic. You've always been dramatic. We did what we had to do for your sister." Dad's voice was weaker, almost apologetic. "We thought it would be easier this way. You were overseas. You wouldn't understand." I stared at them both, my grip on the key biting into my skin. The enormity of their betrayal settled like lead in my chest. Not just that they had taken what was mine, not just that they had sold it for a pittance, but that they had become willing to forge my name, to impersonate me, to erase me from my own story. They hadn't just sold a car, they had rewritten who I was, reducing me to a convenient signature they could copy when it suited them. I felt the laugh again, cold and hollow. They thought they had silenced me, that my boundaries were negotiable, but they didn't know that this time I was holding on to the one thing they couldn't erase. The truth. The front door creaked and Ethan stepped inside, scanning the room with wary eyes. He carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew engines better than people, but even he looked unsettled when he saw the tension crackling in the air. "Where's the car?" he asked simply. Both my parents froze. I took a slow breath, then let the words out like a blade sliding free. "The car you sold wasn't mine." Confusion flickered across Dad's face. Mum's lips parted, ready to argue, but I raised my hand. "You sold Ethan's replica, not my Stingray. Mine is safe, locked away in his garage where you could never touch it." For a moment, silence ruled the room. Then Dad's mouth opened and closed like a man drowning. Mum's colour drained, her smugness collapsing into shock. "What?" she whispered. Ethan crossed his arms, his expression hard. "We switched them before she left. My replica for her authentic Corvette. They look the same to untrained eyes, but mine is worth far less. 30,000 at most." The realization sank in, layer by layer, their faces paling further with each second. Mom reached for the back of a chair, steadying herself as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Dad muttered something incoherent, his newspaper slipping from his hand. I didn't smile, I didn't soften. The cold part of me almost savoured their unravelling. But this wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. "You didn't just steal from me," I said evenly. "You stole from Ethan, you forged my signature, you lied to a buyer, and you sold property that was never yours. That's not just betrayal, that's felony theft." Dad's eyes darted to Ethan as if searching for mercy. "We thought—" "You didn't think," Ethan cut in, his voice like gravel. "Do you understand what you've done? Grand theft auto, fraud, wire fraud if you took electronic payment. Each carries sentences of up to 15 years. 15 years. Mum gasped, tears welling instantly. She turned to me, her voice trembling. "Lauren, you wouldn't let this happen. We're your parents. You wouldn't let us go to jail." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. For most of my life, her tears had been my leash. A few sobs, a quiver in her voice, and I'd fold, comfort her, swallow my anger. But not anymore. "You've already put yourself in jail," I said quietly. "You chose this, not me." Her tears spilled, dramatic loud, meant to drown the room. Dad hovered helplessly, caught between shame and denial. I stood with Ethan, the old garage key still pressed into my palm, and for the first time I felt the weight shift. I didn't rush to soothe her. I didn't offer tissues or apologies. I let her cry, let her sit in the wreckage of her own making, because if there was ever to be a boundary between us, it had to be now. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, an ordinary sound in an extraordinary moment. The daughter they had always dismissed as too dramatic, too independent, too stubborn, was no longer theirs to control. I glanced at Ethan and he gave me the smallest nod, his jaw tight. He understood. This was not about saving my parents from themselves. This was about reclaiming myself. And for the first time, watching my mother crumble, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. My phone lit up again just as Mum's sobs shook the room. This time it was Aunt Sylvia. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Lauren Marie Pierce," she snapped, using my full name like a whip. "How dare you threaten your parents after everything they've done for you?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaustion pressing into my bones. "Aunt Sylvia, you don't know the whole story." "I know enough," she cut in. "Your mother is in tears, your father is beside himself, and all because you care more about a pile of metal than family. You've always been ungrateful." Her words were acid, burning old scars. I let her rant, my silence only fueling her fury, until finally I hung up without explanation. The room was quiet again, save for Mom's theatrical sobbing. And then, like a balm against the sting, my phone rang once more. Uncle George. His voice was steady, warm. "Lauren, I heard what happened. Your mum called Sylvia, and Sylvia called me." "And what do you think?" I asked, bracing for another blow. "I think they were wrong. You don't sell your child's property, not without permission, and you sure as hell don't forge their name. That's criminal, Lauren. Don't let anyone guilt you into thinking otherwise." Relief caught me off guard, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered. George sighed. "Your grandfather would be furious with them, but proud of you. You're standing firm, and that's what matters." When the call ended, I sat staring at my phone. One relative condemning me, another defending me. It was a microcosm of my whole life, a split down the middle, some seeing me as selfish, others as simply surviving. And deep down I knew, if the car they had sold had truly been my Stingray, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have pressed charges. No amount of blood ties could have softened that blow. The replica had bought me time, but the wound was still raw. The betrayal no less brutal. Ethan crouched beside the coffee table, rifling through the manila folder Dad had left half hidden. His brow furrowed. "Lauren, come look at this." I knelt beside him, my stomach tightening. He held out a photocopy of the bill of sale. At first glance it looked ordinary enough, but then his finger traced a line. "The VIN number," he said quietly. "It doesn't match the car they sold. They copied it wrong. Maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. Either way, if the buyer runs this through the system, it won't just look sloppy. It'll look like fraud, federal fraud." My blood ran cold. "How bad?" "Bad," Ethan said grimly. "Misrepresentation of a vehicle's identity can fall under federal jurisdiction. Wire transfer, interstate commerce, it escalates fast. If authorities get wind, this won't just be a civil matter, it'll be the FBI." Mom's sobbing quieted at that. Her eyes wide, wet lashes trembling. "No," she breathed. "That can't be true." Ethan didn't soften. "It is. And it's worse than anything you've imagined. You thought selling her car would give Mia a vacation. What you actually did could land both of you behind bars for more than a decade." Dad sagged into a chair, his face ashen, as though the weight of his decisions had finally come crashing down. I sank back onto my heels, the room spinning. The rush of relief I'd felt hours ago, knowing my Corvette was safe, dissolved, replaced by a new dread. I wasn't free, none of us were. The storm had only shifted directions, and now it threatened to swallow us all. The emotions crashed like waves, fury at their betrayal, a sliver of relief at my car's safety, terror at the legal trap yawning beneath us. Up, down, the rhythm of a life lived under family's unpredictable hand. I tightened my fist around the silver key. I had thought I'd escaped, that I'd finally won. But the truth was clearer now. There were deeper costs to their choices, costs none of us had yet begun to pay. The coffee shop was halfway between Chicago and Indianapolis, a neutral ground chosen for a meeting that felt anything but neutral. Ethan and I arrived first, sliding into a corner booth with a clear view of the door. My hands wrapped around a paper cup, not drinking, just holding on, as though the warmth might anchor me. 10 minutes later, Peter Donovan walked in. Middle-aged, trim suit, sharp eyes that carried no patience for pleasantries. He spotted us immediately, his jaw tight, and marched over. "You must be Lauren," he said, his voice clipped. He didn't wait for me to nod. "And you must be the boyfriend. Do you two have any idea what kind of mess you've dropped me into?" Ethan motioned for him to sit. Peter dropped into the booth, leaning forward, his elbows on the table, like a prosecutor about to begin cross-examination. "I paid $50,000 for that car," he hissed. "Now the title won't transfer, the signature is questionable, and the VIN is wrong." "Do you know what that looks like? Fraud. Stolen property. If I hadn't called, I'd already be talking to the police." My chest tightened, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "We know this is a disaster and we want to fix it." Peter's laugh was humourless. "Fix it? You don't just fix fraud." Ethan slid a folded document across the table. "Here's our offer. Full reimbursement of the $50,000 plus $5,000 more for your trouble. You'll get your money back and we'll recover the car. Clean break." Peter stared at the paper as if it were poison. "You think I'm just going to take a refund and walk away? Do you know the risk I took wiring that money? Do you know what happens if my insurance company finds out I bought a fraudulent vehicle? I could be implicated." "We understand," I said quickly. "That's why we're adding compensation. We want you whole, and we want this settled quietly, without involving law enforcement. None of this was your fault. And none of it should touch you." His eyes flicked between us, calculating. For a long moment, the clatter of cups and chatter of strangers filled the space around us, ordinary life happening while ours balanced on a knife's edge. Finally, Peter exhaled through his nose. "I'll consider it, but I want the money wired immediately. I'm not waiting weeks while you sort out family drama. I want my account cleared before I hand over the car." Ethan inclined his head. "That's fair. We'll make the transfer as soon as the funds are arranged." Peter narrowed his gaze. "Arranged? You don't already have it?" I forced a small smile. "Not sitting in this booth, but yes, it will be arranged, quickly." He tapped his fingers on the table, unimpressed. "You'd better move fast, because if I smell even a hint of delay, I'll go straight to the authorities, and I won't be the one in handcuffs." The words hung heavy, a threat wrapped in reason. I nodded slowly. "We'll make it right." Peter stood, straightening his jacket. "See that you do." He left without a handshake, without a backward glance, his exit as sharp as his entrance. I slumped back against the booth, the adrenaline leaving me hollow. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "Well, that could have gone worse, or better," I muttered. The reality pressed in. $55,000. Immediate transfer. Parents already drowning in debt. Mia oblivious on a sunlit deck in the Mediterranean. The storm wasn't over, it had just shifted shores. Back at my parents' house, the air was thick with desperation. Dad paced the living room, his hands raking through his thinning hair. Mum sat stiffly on the couch, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. I laid out Peter's demand. 55,000 wired immediately, or he would go to the police. Dad's voice cracked. "We don't have that kind of money lying around. The kitchen renovation drained our savings. The only asset we have is the house." Mum's head snapped towards him, eyes blazing. "We are not selling our home." "It may be our only option," he muttered, but the way his shoulders hunched told me he already knew she'd never agree. I folded my arms. "Then you'll need another plan, because Peter isn't waiting. He made that very clear." For once, silence reigned. The two of them, always so quick with excuses, had nothing. The sound of my phone vibrating cut through the tension. It was Ethan holding up his screen. "Call Mia, now." Reluctantly, I dialed my sister on the cruise ship's satellite line. Music and laughter spilled through before her voice came on, light and carefree. "Lauren, how's Tokyo? Oh wait, you're home now, right? Why are you calling?" Mia, I said, forcing steel into my voice, Mom and Dad sold Ethan's car to pay for your vacation. They forged my name. We're facing legal fallout and we need money immediately. A pause, then laughter, casual and dismissive. Oh, come on, you're exaggerating. They just sold your car. You can buy another. It wasn't my car, it was Ethan's, and what they did is a crime. The laughter died. Crime? Yes, grand theft auto, fraud, federal charges if it escalates. You're sipping cocktails while the rest of us scramble to keep them out of prison. This is your mess too. She stammered, for once at a loss. Then faintly, I didn't ask them to. You begged for this cruise, I snapped. Stop pretending otherwise. You wanted it and they delivered. Now you're going to help clean it up. When she finally arrived 2 days later, sunburned and brittle from a forced early return, the change was immediate. Mum smothered her with sympathy, but Mia shook her off. Enough, Mum. I'm not a child anymore. I'll deal with the consequences. The room went silent, as if no one had expected her to speak against the script she'd been handed her whole life. Before I could process that, Ethan's phone chimed. A notification. He glanced at it, cursed under his breath, then showed me the screen. My stomach dropped. Peter Donovan had posted pictures of the Corvette on a classic car forum, boasting about his new acquisition. Already dozens of comments speculated about the car's authenticity, the VIN number, the sale. The story was spreading like fire through dry grass. This is bad, Ethan muttered. If the wrong eyes see this, someone's going to report it. And then it won't matter what deal we made. Dad groaned, sinking into his recliner as if it might swallow him. Mum wrung her hands, finally stripped of her dismissive composure. Mia bit her lip, pale beneath her tan. I forced myself to speak with finality. Here's how this works. You're going to pull together the money, all of it now, no delays. Dad rubbed his face. The bank might let us take a home equity loan. Maybe 40,000? I turned to Mia. You're covering 10 from your savings. Her eyes widened. That's almost everything I have. Exactly. Actions have consequences. Mum sputtered. She's just starting her life. She can't... She's 36, I cut in. Old enough to vacation across the Mediterranean. Old enough to pay for it. Mia's chin lifted. Fine, I'll do it. I faced Mum last. The remaining 5 comes from your jewellery collection. The rings, the bracelets, all the things you insisted we couldn't touch. Consider it payment for your choices. Her lips parted in outrage, but no sound came. For once, she had no defence. The terms hung in the air, heavy but undeniable. 40 from the house, 10 from Mia, 5 from Mum's treasures, 55,000, the price of betrayal. It started with a ping on Ethan's phone, then mine. By morning, the classic car forum was ablaze. Peter Donovan's proud post about his newly acquired '69 Stingray had exploded overnight. Photos of the car gleamed on the homepage, drawing attention from collectors across the country. But the comments, those were the real wildfire. VIN doesn't look right. Too clean for a true '69. Somebody check registration records. Within hours, the speculation sharpened into near certainty. One user uploaded a screenshot of a VIN database search, highlighting the discrepancy. The number on Peter's bill of sale didn't match the Corvette pictured. Dozens piled on, calling it fraudulent, warning that the FBI had jurisdiction over interstate car scams. Ethan swore under his breath, his eyes locked on the screen. This is spiralling fast. If law enforcement sees this, it won't matter what deal we made. It'll be out of our hands. By noon, Peter was calling non-stop. When I finally answered, his voice was high and clipped with panic. Do you see what's happening? They're saying I bought a fake. I could be dragged into an investigation. Do you have any idea what that means for me? We're working on it, I said, forcing calm I didn't feel. Working on it isn't enough, he barked. I want my money back now. If this isn't resolved immediately, I'm going to the police myself. I won't take the fall for your family's fraud. His words sank like stones into my gut. We'll get you your refund, I promised, though I had no idea how we'd make it happen before the rumours metastasised into headlines. When I hung up, the house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Mum sat rigid on the couch, her hands twisting in her lap. Dad leaned against the doorway, his face lined deeper than I'd ever noticed. Mia stood by the window, arms crossed, chewing her lip. This is a nightmare, Dad murmured. It's more than a nightmare, Ethan said. This is a federal offence if it lands in the wrong inbox. Mum's voice rose sharply, brittle with denial. There must be another way. Maybe we can explain. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Forgery isn't a misunderstanding, I snapped, the restraint in my voice breaking. You signed my name, you lied. You sold something that wasn't even mine. Do you understand? That's not just bad judgment, that's a crime. Mum recoiled as though I'd slapped her. Dad pressed his palms to his eyes. Mia shifted uneasily, and for once there was no entitlement in her expression, only fear. I walked to the basket by the door, lifted the silver garage key that still lay among the clutter and held it up. This key meant everything to me, and you treated it like trash. Just like you treated me. And now you want me to clean this up while you pretend it's all going to vanish. My voice cracked, not with weakness but with rage sharpened to a blade. If I go to the authorities, you'll both face charges. You could lose everything. But if I don't, if I help cover this, you drag me into your lies. That makes me a criminal too. Silence, heavy and suffocating, filled the room. Their faces blurred through the haze of tears I refused to shed. I had spent my whole life caught between silence and compliance, between being the strong one and the forgotten one. And now I was trapped again, between condemning them or becoming their accomplice. The clock ticked louder, my heart pounded harder, and I realised that whatever I chose, nothing about my family would ever look the same again. The next 48 hours blurred into a frantic race. Calls to the bank, meetings with loan officers, papers signed with trembling hands. Dad secured the home equity line, Mum reluctantly gathered her jewellery to be appraised, and Mia, shockingly, walked into the credit union alone to withdraw her savings. When she came back, she dropped the envelope on the kitchen table with a thud. 10,000, every cent I had? Mum gasped, reaching out as though to snatch it away. Mia, no, you can't. Mia's voice was sharper than I'd ever heard. Enough, Mum. I made this mess too. I begged for that cruise. I looked the other way while you did what you did. I'm paying my share, Stowe. The words silenced the room. For the first time in her life, Mia wasn't playing the child, the favoured one shielded from consequence. She was standing with me, not against me. By Friday, the funds were ready. Ethan and I wired the full $55,000 to Peter under the watchful eye of Alicia, the lawyer who had agreed to help us draft the settlement. Within hours, Peter confirmed receipt and promised to return the car. Relief rolled through me like a tide, shaky, thin, but real. We drove to Indianapolis to collect it. When Peter pulled up with the replica, my stomach twisted. From a distance, it gleamed just as it had when I left it in my parents' garage. Rally red, polished curves, the illusion of permanence. But as Ethan walked a slow circle around the car, his face tightened. Lauren, he called, come look. I joined him, my pulse quickening. And there it was. A fresh scrape along the rear fender, shallow but undeniable, the kind of mark that spoke of careless driving, of someone testing limits. Peter lifted his hands defensively. It wasn't me. I didn't drive it. I had it towed after the sale. Whatever happened, happened before I got it. The words sank like ice into my chest. Before he got it. Which meant someone had driven the car while it sat in my parents' care. I crouched, running my fingers over the scratch. It was nothing catastrophic, easily buffed out. But it wasn't about the paint. It was about trust, or the shreds of it left. Someone had taken liberties, had touched what wasn't theirs. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who drove it? Peter shook his head. I can't tell you. All I know is it came with that mark. We signed the paperwork, exchanged the necessary documents and loaded the car for transport, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. Back home, I opened the folder of fraudulent papers, flipping through forged signatures and mismatched VINs. Instead of shredding them as my parents begged, I slid them into a fireproof lockbox in my apartment closet. Evidence, insurance, proof that if this ever spiralled again, I wouldn't be the one left carrying their sins. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, I cornered Mia in the hallway. Tell me the truth, I said, softly. Did you drive it? Her eyes widened, guilty, then narrowed. Why would you think that? Because someone did, I replied, and it wasn't Peter. That scratch didn't come from nowhere. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she shook her head too quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. She brushed past me, retreating into her room, leaving a trail of silence thicker than denial. I stood in the dark hallway, the silver garage key cold in my palm. My car was safe, my Stingray untouched. But Ethan's replica had carried someone else's hands on its wheel, someone else's recklessness etched into its paint. The betrayal wasn't finished. It had only changed shape. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee, the kind of space designed to impress clients and intimidate adversaries. Today it held neither. It held only my fractured family, a lawyer, and the weight of choices that could not be undone. Alicia Ramirez, sharp-eyed and steady, shuffled the stack of papers before her. This settlement formalises the restitution. $55,000 reimbursed to Mr. Donovan, acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a notarised letter of apology. Once signed, all parties agree to resolve the matter privately. No further legal action will be pursued. Dad nodded. His hands clasped so tight the knuckles whitened. Mum sat rigid, eyes downcast, lips pressed to a thin line. Mia shifted uncomfortably, her shoulders tense, as if she wanted to disappear. Ethan sat beside me, calm but alert, his presence a shield. Alicia slid the first document across the table. The wire transfer confirmation. Dad signed quickly, his pen scratching across the page. His face was pale, drawn, but there was no hesitation. Money could be borrowed, repaid, shuffled on paper. Dignity was harder. The second document, the return of Ethan's replica, acknowledgement of its condition, passed with the same quiet efficiency. Ethan signed firmly, his movements deliberate, making it clear he wasn't granting absolution, only closure. Then came the letter of apology. Alicia tapped it once, her tone even. This must be read aloud before it is signed and notarised. Transparency matters here. Silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Mum's hand trembled as she reached for the page. Her mouth opened, closed, the words stuck in her throat like barbed wire. She pushed it away, shaking her head. I can't. A muscle in my jaw twitched. You can't or you won't. Her eyes flashed to mine, then away, as if the force of my gaze burned. I just can't. No. Dad cleared his throat, picked up the letter with unsteady hands and began to read. We, Charles and Elaine Pierce, acknowledge that we wrongfully sold a vehicle without consent, forged our daughter's signature and misrepresented ownership. Our actions were illegal, dishonest and deeply disrespectful to both Lauren and Ethan. We accept responsibility for the harm caused, and we pledge never to interfere with their property or decisions again. His voice wavered on the last sentence, thick with shame. He lowered the paper, his eyes wet. I'm sorry, Lauren. I'm sorry, Ethan. We failed you. The room held its breath. I looked at my mother. Her face was streaked with silent tears, but still she hadn't spoken. The letter lay between us like a boundary she refused to cross. For years I had caved to those tears, softened my stance, told myself love meant compromise. But this wasn't compromise. This was accountability. You don't have to cry, I said quietly. You just have to own what you did. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence stretched until Alicia, efficient as ever, slid the notary stamp across the table. Signature, please. Dad signed again. Then slowly, grudgingly, Mum added her name beneath his. The ink glistened wetly, sealing what her voice could not. Alicia pressed the notary stamp with a firm click. The sound was final, echoing louder than any gavel. It should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like standing on shifting sand. We had the money, the car, the document. But what I didn't have, what I wasn't sure I would ever have, was sincerity. Ethan slipped his hand over mine under the table, grounding me. The silver garage key pressed against my palm, cool and heavy. Mum couldn't read the apology aloud, but the paper existed. The signature existed. For once in our history, there was proof carved in ink that I wasn't crazy, that the betrayal was real, that the blame wasn't mine to carry. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was something. The papers were signed, the settlement sealed, but the room didn't feel lighter. It felt suspended, like a storm had passed, but the air was still too heavy to breathe. On the drive home, Dad cleared his throat, his voice tentative. "Lauren," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, "your Uncle George is thinking of letting go of his old pickup, the one your grandfather used to drive. I was wondering, maybe we could buy it, fix it up together." I turned towards him, startled. My father, who had never once stepped into the garage with me, except to shake his head at the grease on my jeans, was offering to learn, to join me on my ground. The thought lodged in my chest, painful and tender at once. "I'd like that," I said quietly. And I meant it. 2 weeks later, we sat in a family therapist's office, beige walls and soft lamps casting a false calm. Mum perched on the edge of the sofa, arms crossed, while Mia slouched beside her. I sat opposite, with Ethan at my side. The therapist asked why we were there. Silence stretched until Mum finally spoke. "I suppose I thought protecting Mia was my job. She was always fragile, easily hurt. Lauren was strong. She didn't need me the same way." Her words hung there, heavy and raw. I wanted to shout, to tell her how wrong she had been. But the therapist nudged gently. And what did that belief cost Lauren? Mom's eyes flicked to me, then down. "It cost her my attention, my care." The admission stung, but it was something, a crack in the wall she had built around her favouritism. I swallowed hard. Strength isn't an excuse to abandon someone. I needed you too. Mia shifted, guilt flickering across her face. For once, she didn't argue. Later that night, as Ethan and I sat at my kitchen table, the tension of the day still pressing on me, he pulled a small device from his pocket, a GPS tracker no bigger than a matchbox. "I need to tell you something," he said, his tone careful. "When we swapped cars, I planted this on the replica. Insurance. I didn't trust your parents, and I wanted to know where it went if something happened." My breath caught. "You tracked it?" He nodded. And before Donovan got it, the data shows the car was driven, not far, but enough, a few miles around the neighbourhood. The timestamps matched the days right before your trip ended. The scrape on the fender, the uneasy look in Mia's eyes when I'd asked her. The pieces clicked together. "It was her," I whispered. "Mia drove it." Ethan didn't answer, but the silence confirmed it. I pressed my hands to my face, emotions tumbling, anger, betrayal, sorrow. She risked everything, even after knowing how much that car meant, even after Mum and Dad promised they'd keep it safe. "She's part of this too," Ethan said gently, "not just as the one who benefited. She was behind the wheel." I dropped my hands, staring at the garage key lying on the table. For so long I had believed I was the only one carrying the burden of their choices. Now the truth was sharper. Mia hadn't just been the reason. She had been a participant. It was a twist I hadn't expected, a wound deeper than I was ready to face. My parents had betrayed me, but my sister had driven the betrayal home, mile by mile, with her own hands on the wheel. 1 month later, the dining room felt like unfamiliar territory. The same table, the same chairs, but the atmosphere was different, lighter, if still tentative, like a wound wrapped in fresh bandages. Dad set a platter of roast chicken in the middle, but instead of piling food onto my plate as though he knew best, he looked at me first. "Do you want some, Lauren?" The question was simple, but it stopped me cold. For the first time in my life, he was asking instead of assuming. Mum followed suit. When she reached for the salad, she hesitated. "Would you like me to serve you?" she asked. My throat tightened, and I managed a nod. They were small gestures, almost invisible to anyone else, but to me they were seismic, proof that boundaries could exist even at a family table. Mia, too, had shifted. She arrived late from work, her hair pinned back, her steps tired but purposeful. Sliding into her chair, she pulled out her phone, not to scroll, but to show us her bank statement. "I made the first repayment," she announced. $200 towards the loan." Mum frowned. "That's not much." "It's mine," Mia interrupted, sharper than I'd ever heard her. "And I'll keep paying. I want to carry this myself." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was recognition. My sister, the girl who had been sheltered from every consequence, was finally taking her first steps into responsibility. And though resentment still prickled inside me, I felt a flicker of something else too, hope. After dinner, Ethan and I excused ourselves, leaving the others behind. We drove out towards Lake Michigan, the stingray humming beneath us like a beast finally freed from its cage. The sun had dipped low, painting the horizon in bruised purples and fiery oranges. The waves caught the light, glittering like fragments of stained glass. I rested my hand on the wheel, the leather warm beneath my palm. Ethan leaned back, watching me with that quiet pride that had carried me through so much. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he asked. I nodded, the engine's rumble thrumming in my chest. It feels like balance, like the car itself is reminding me what love is supposed to be. Ethan tilted his head. "Go on." "Engines run on precision," I said slowly. "Every piston, every spark has to fire in rhythm. Too much pressure and it explodes. Too little and it stalls. Families are like that. They need rules, boundaries, respect. Without them, everything misfires." The metaphor settled between us, carried by the low growl of the V8. For years my family had treated me as the unbreakable one, the daughter who didn't need care, the woman who could be overlooked without consequence. They had mistaken endurance for invincibility, and in doing so they had broken the rhythm. But now, as the stingray surged down the shoreline, I realised something vital. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't the one abandoned at the margins of family portraits or silenced at the dinner table. I was the driver. I pressed the accelerator, the car leaping forward with a roar, and the lake blurred beside us. For once, the sound wasn't just an echo of my grandfather's lessons or a reminder of what I'd lost. It was a declaration of what I'd claimed: freedom, boundaries, respect. And as the last light of day spilled across the hood, I knew I would never again let anyone else decide my worth. When Ethan and I returned from the drive, the house had grown quieter. Mia was washing dishes, Dad watching from the doorway as though supervision could help. Mum lingered at the edge of the dining room, her hands restless against the hem of her blouse. When the others slipped away, she approached me, her face pale but determined. "Lauren," she began, her voice low, stripped of the sharpness that usually cut through every conversation. "Can we talk?" We stepped into the living room. The silence there was softer, almost forgiving, the shadows stretching long across the floor. She wrung her hands before finally blurting, "I know I failed you." I blinked, startled by the nakedness of her words. "For years," she continued, "I thought I was protecting Mia. She seemed so fragile, and you were strong. You didn't need me. At least that's what I told myself. But the truth is, I left you to fend for yourself. I left you alone." Her eyes brimmed, not with the theatrical sobs I'd seen too many times, but with something quieter: regret. "I abandoned you, Lauren. I see that now." The words cracked something in me. For so long I had begged silently for acknowledgement. Now that it was here, I felt both vindicated and raw. "I can't forgive you overnight," I said finally. "It doesn't work that way. But I can admit this is a start, and I want it to keep moving forward." She nodded, tears slipping free, and for once she didn't try to pull me into an embrace. She respected the space between us. It was small, but it was everything. Later, back at my apartment, I unlocked the door and hung my grandfather's garage key on a hook by the entryway. For decades it had been shoved into drawers, lost among clutter, forgotten. Now it stood alone, visible every time I walked in or out. A reminder that my story was mine, that I was no longer the discarded child, no longer the family's silent sacrifice. I was the keeper of my own boundaries. As I turned, Ethan stood behind me, a faint smile playing at his lips. "I've been keeping something from you," he said lightly. My brows lifted. "After everything, you think I can handle surprises?" "This one, yes." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to me. Inside was a deed, creased but official. My breath caught. "The pickup," I whispered. "Uncle George's truck." Ethan nodded. "Your dad and I bought it together. He wanted to surprise you. Said it was time the two of you got your hands dirty on something real, not as a transaction." As family. The paper trembled in my hands as tears blurred the words. It wasn't the truck itself, it was what it represented. For the first time, my father wasn't just tolerating my world. He was stepping into it, willing to meet me where I had always been waiting. I pressed the deed against my chest, laughter and sobs colliding. I never thought they'd choose to stay, to actually stay with me. Ethan wrapped his arms around me, his voice warm against my hair. They're trying, and that matters. Later we drove the Stingray again, the lake glowing with the last fire of sunset. The V8 roared deep and steady, the sound rolling over the water like a hymn. As the horizon swallowed the sun, I tightened my grip on the wheel, the garage key glinting back at me from its new place of honour. "I'm not their wallet anymore," I murmured, the words carried by the wind. "I'm the driver." The engine thundered in agreement, and for the first time I believed it.